I didn't think I'd live long enough to see dawn again. When they hauled me from the wedding hall, when they yanked my wrists hard enough to bruise, no one bothered to look at my face. Not really. They looked at the mark on my skin, at the knot of old bloodlines, at the story that had already been decided for me. They called me the enemy's bride. They said I'd betrayed my pack the moment the vows were spoken, that I'd worn a smile like a blade and opened their gates from the inside. They said the human-sent hunters had vanished through the border mist because I'd guided them with my false loyalty. They said I did it because I wanted power. But power was the one thing they'd never let me choose. I'd been raised in the border territories where magic sat under the tongue like a suppressed song. In our world, humans weren't permitted to step beyond the wards. They didn't belong among the teeth of the old gods, among the forests that listened and the wolves that remembered. We were the last line between the breathing wild and the cold, hungry dark. My father used to tell me that loyalty wasn't a chain. It was a vow you carried until it turned into bone. Then the day came when the enemy pack demanded a bride in exchange for peace. I wasn't a girl asking to be chosen. I was a piece moved across a board made by men who never had to live with the outcome. They brought me to the wedding hall under lantern light and strict eyes, under banners that promised safety. I wore my veil because they told me to. I walked to the altar because they told me to. I spoke the words because the words were already arranged. The night of the vow, I didn't open any gates. I didn't guide anyone through mist. I didn't touch the runes. I was barely past the threshold of the bridal chambers when I felt it. The pull, like a hook lodged under my ribs. Magic waking under pressure. A shape pressing against my skin that I didn't recognize. I went to the window, thinking the feeling was just nerves. Then the air split with a sound like tearing cloth. The enemy's lord, Vesper Hailwyn, appeared in the courtyard below with a dozen shadows behind him, as if he'd been waiting for me to look. His gaze lifted to the second-story window. To me. Even from that height, even through the veil of night, I felt his satisfaction, like he'd staged a play and was watching the final act land. "Seraphine Vorthel," he called softly, as if my name was a private invitation. "You were never meant to belong to them." My heartbeat stumbled. I should have been afraid. I should have run. Instead, my magic flared, hot and wrong, snapping against the wards stitched into my skin. I pulled back from the window, hands shaking, and tried to breathe through it. A moment later, the courtyard erupted, not with his troops, with screams, my pack's guards, the ones stationed outside the border hall, the ones who'd promised peace with their bodies. The truth is, I didn't understand it at first. I'd always been told I was a conduit, a bride, a vessel for negotiations. But there are different kinds of vessels. Some carry hope, some carry traps. When dawn finally bled into the sky, blood stained the stones and silence swallowed the hall. My vow was still in my mouth, but my hands were smeared with stains I hadn't made. They found human-sent hunters in the mist. They found runes rearranged. They found evidence, real evidence, terrible evidence, pointing at me. And then Vesper stepped forward like a man stepping into sunlight. "Seraphine," he said, voice like velvet over broken glass. "You were supposed to open the wards. I suppose you forgot your place." My pack's leader, my bloodline's authority, flinched at the sound of his name. Not fear, recognition. That's when I realized betrayal didn't always come from the enemy. Sometimes it came from the people who called themselves family. They accused me publicly. They bound my wrists with iron that drank my magic and left me hollow. They paraded the bruises from the wedding night, pretending they were proof of my violence. They told everyone I'd moved the pieces while they slept. When I tried to speak, when I tried to explain the pulling in my chest, the wards, the way my magic had fought me, my voice turned thin. Like the world refused to let me say the truth. Then came the verdict. Exile. Banished from pack territory. No wards would protect me. No pack would hunt for me. If I survived out there, it would only be because the wild decided I was useful to it. They pushed me through the outer gates with hands that didn't shake, with eyes that didn't soften. As I stumbled into the forest, I expected to be torn apart by predators. What I didn't expect was the quiet, the absence of menacing growls. The forest didn't attack me. It listened. It waited. And while I walked, barefoot on cold earth, cloak torn from my shoulders, iron still biting at my wrists, I felt that hook under my ribs again. The magic inside me wasn't dead, it was sleeping. And it was waking on the other side of my punishment. Hours later, I found the first sign of the trap meant to finish me. A line of blackened stones marked the trail, each one inscribed with a ward that didn't belong to any pack I knew. It wasn't meant to keep an enemy out. It was meant to lure a specific kind of blood. Mine. My stomach rolled. Someone wanted me exactly where I was walking. Someone wanted my magic to break. I should have turned back, but my wrists hurt and the night was too wide and the world too hungry. I couldn't afford pride. I followed the stones because stopping would mean dying slower. When I reached the clearing, I saw him. Not a wolf, not a hunter, a king. Kael Draven stood beneath the moon as if it were his crown. His silhouette was a blade of muscle and control, silver hair darkening at the roots, storm-gray eyes reflecting light without warmth. His shoulders were broad, his stance still, his presence loud even when he didn't move. Around him, men and wolves held distance, too much distance, like even they were afraid to breathe too hard. The air tasted of iron and ash. Then Kael's gaze slid to me. I flinched because his eyes weren't just watching. They were measuring my broken shape against something only he understood. "You're walking in a ward that wasn't built for you," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I should have lied. I should have bowed. But exile had already stripped me of the habits of obedience. Pain had taught me my own worth in the cruelest way. "I don't know who built it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not asking permission to survive." A dangerous pause settled. Then Kael stepped closer, slow enough that I could feel the pressure of him like a tide. My wards, what remained of them, crackled faintly. The iron on my wrists vibrated as if it wanted to melt. I backed up until my spine met a tree. Kael didn't stop. His eyes tracked the iron cuffs. "Those chains are meant to starve a conduit." I tasted bitterness on my tongue. I was punished for being the wrong kind of conduit. His expression shifted barely. It wasn't sympathy. It was anger. Controlled anger. "Wrong," he repeated, as if the word offended him. Then the shadows around us shifted. The black stones on the ground flared. A tether of darkness yawned open beneath my feet. I felt the ward's intent before I saw it, to yank my magic out of me like a heart from a chest. Kael moved instantly. He didn't roar. He didn't throw a spell like a theatrical hero. He simply reached, not at my magic, not at the stones, but at me. His hand wrapped around my forearm. The touch wasn't gentle. It was claim. Heat slammed through me. The hook under my ribs snapped into focus, suddenly recognizing his presence like an old enemy recognizing a new key. The iron cuffs shrieked. I sucked in breath, stumbling. Kael's jaw tightened. "Hold still." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to spit in his face, but the ward was tearing at me, and my body was already betraying my pride. Kael drew out a rune knife, dark metal, etched with lines that looked like veins. He pressed the blade against the iron cuff on my wrist. Not cutting, waking. The runes in the iron responded as if they'd been waiting for permission. A quiet pulse spread through the cuffs, then snapped. The chain shattered with a sound like ice breaking. My skin tingled. My magic surged upward, frantic and bright. I stared at him, at the way his hand had steadied me without asking, at the way his eyes never left my face. He freed the other cuff the same way. Then the ward under the stones collapsed, its darkness collapsing inward like it had been embarrassed. The tether dissolved. Silence returned. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was aftermath. I expected Kael to leave me there. Kings didn't save exiles for free. They saved because they had a purpose. So when Kael lifted his chin toward the tree line, I knew I was about to find out what that purpose was. My own fear turned sharp. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice hoarse. Kael looked at me like the answer was obvious and insulting. "Kael Draven." I swallowed. Everyone in the border territories knew the name, Alpha King of the Northern Pacts, the one whose laws kept the human world at bay, the one rumored to have killed his own father for treachery, the one no exile ever survived unless he decided otherwise. Kael's gaze dipped to my birthmark, the crescent at my collarbone glowing faintly now that the ward was broken. "There are people who want you to burn," he said. I drew in a shaky breath. "And there are people who want me dead." He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell him, pine smoke and cold steel. "Come with me," he ordered. I should have hated the command. I did. But the way he said it wasn't the way my pack's leaders had demanded obedience. This was different. This was refusal. Refusal to let fate finish me. I tried to lift my chin anyway. "You don't know me." "I know what they did to you," Kael said. That was worse than cruelty. That was a kind of intimacy I hadn't earned. I couldn't stop myself. "How?" Kael's eyes narrowed. "Because the person who sold you to the enemy still thinks he's safe." My throat went tight. Vesper's name wasn't spoken, but it hung between us like a blade poised above skin. Kael watched me realize it. His wall didn't rise. His silence became a door slowly opening. I didn't walk toward him right away. I refused to be moved like a pawn again. "I'll go," I said at last, "but not because you ordered me. I'll go because if someone hunted me, then someone will pay for it." Kael's mouth barely curved. "Good." The word was quiet, loaded. He turned, and I followed at a distance at first, close enough to keep my pride intact, far enough to keep myself from being swallowed. As we moved through the forest toward his territories, I felt eyes on me. Not just men, wolves. Some curious, some hostile, some afraid. But not all of them looked away the moment they saw my birthmark. A few watched as if they recognized the shape of my power. That realization made my stomach churn. Power that had been used against me wasn't just inside me. It was part of an inheritance someone had been trying to conceal. When we reached the border where Kael's wards began, the air changed. The forest stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a boundary, like a living wall that could smell intention. Kael stepped through first. I followed. My magic answered the wards like a heartbeat answering a drum. Inside the territory, the moonlight looked richer. The shadows didn't crawl, they settled. We moved through corridors of old stone and living vines toward a fortress that stood as if it had grown from the earth. Torchlight flickered against walls carved with runes that looked like stories. As we approached the outer hall, voices snapped into silence. Kael's knights, wolves in armor, parted the way. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. At the same time, I felt their judgments like cold wind. They saw me as the enemy's bride. They saw the mark and filled the blanks with a lie. When one of them, a broad-shouldered guard with a scar across his knuckles, stepped forward, his posture was aggressive. "Your Majesty," he said, voice sharp, "this one is dangerous." My jaw clenched. Dangerous. I'd been called dangerous like it was a natural state, like exile had been justified because my existence threatened them. Kael turned his head just slightly, eyes cutting. "What did she do?" The guard hesitated. He didn't have evidence, only rumor. He had stories people told to protect themselves from their own guilt. "She betrayed the pack," he said finally. Kael's gaze slid to me, not to interrogate, to anchor. The wall inside me, built from years of being misunderstood, wavered. I took a breath, feeling the magic under my skin like embers. "I didn't," I said. My voice wasn't soft. It was raw, Certain. The guard scoffed. Prove it. I could have snapped. I could have begged. Instead, I did something I'd never been able to do in public. I reached for my power without fear. My collarbone burned. The crescent birthmark flared. Magic poured into the air, not a weapon, not a blast, a truth. The runes on the guard's armor trembled. His eyes widened. That mark. Kael watched, still as stone. The guard swallowed hard, posture shifting from accusation to uncertainty. He started. Kael lifted a hand, stopping him. Enough, Kael said. She is under my protection. Protection. The word struck me harder than any threat. I'd been thrown away like trash. Now he claimed me with authority so absolute it made my skin prickle. But his eyes didn't soften. Not yet. I knew that look. Walls coming down slowly. Walls built from surviving too long. That night, Kael brought me to an upper chamber overlooking the courtyard. The room was warm. Too warm, like it had been prepared for someone who would arrive in grief. There was water in a basin, clean cloth, a cloak laid across a chair. I stared at it like it might burn me. Eat, Kael said when he noticed my hesitation. I turned my face away. I don't want your food. He stepped closer, careful now, voice lower. Then drink. He didn't touch me. He simply set a cup within reach. My hands were still unsteady without the iron cuffs, but I took the cup anyway. I drank, slow, like each swallow was a decision I controlled. Kael watched me with that same storm-gray intensity. After a moment, he spoke again. You were never meant to be the enemy's bride. My breath caught. I looked at him. What do you mean? Kael's jaw flexed. The treaty that brought you there. Someone changed it. Someone forced your consent out of the equation. My throat tightened. Vesper. Kael's gaze darkened. The answer didn't need to be said. My magic thrummed, offended at being dragged into someone else's plot. I clenched my fingers around the cup. Why would he do that? Why frame me like that? Kael's voice turned colder. Because you carry something he wants. The way he said it made me feel small and furious all at once. Something I don't even understand, I said. Kael came closer but still didn't reach. You will. I wanted answers right then. I wanted vengeance. But vengeance without understanding was just another kind of trap. I swallowed and set the cup aside. If you're protecting me, then protect my name too. Don't let your people decide what I am. Kael studied me. Then he nodded once. By morning, they will know the truth I uncovered, he said. I didn't believe him. Not fully. Kings uncovered truths like knives uncovered bone. But I couldn't deny the warmth in my chest. Not hope. Something sharper. Possibility. Later, when Kael stepped out, I stood alone in the chamber and stared at the window where moonlight spilled onto the floor. My magic didn't settle. It coiled. It wanted out. I touched my birthmark, feeling the crescent glow faintly beneath my skin. Then I realized something. The magic hadn't just been waiting. It had been reacting to Kael. When he touched my wrist, the hook inside me recognized his authority like it was an old oath. I didn't understand why, but I could feel the truth clawing at the edges of my denial. Kael Draven wasn't just a king. He was part of what had been stolen from me. And whatever had been taken might require more than fighting. It might require trusting. I didn't sleep. Instead, I practiced. I worked the way my magic responded, turning it inward, calming it, then testing boundaries. Every time my control sharpened, my pain eased a fraction. I was building myself back, not only surviving, rewriting. By the time dawn crept along the horizon, my power felt less like an accident and more like a language. Kael called me to the throne hall. The fortress woke around us with quiet menace, guards patrolling, servants moving like shadows. Every conversation cut short the moment my name was mentioned. I stepped into the hall with my chin raised. No one got to see me flinch. The throne room was huge, carved with wolf silhouettes and old runes. A canopy of banners hung from the ceiling, colors deep as blood wine. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the king's presence. Kael stood at the center, not seated yet, as if he was waiting for the world to show its hand. On either side, council members gathered, wolves with eyes like steel and mouths full of judgment. Some looked at me with disdain. Some looked afraid. One or two looked almost guilty. I didn't care about guilt. I cared about truth. Kael lifted his hand. Silence snapped into place. Seraphine Vorthel, Kael said, voice carrying, has been accused of betraying her pack and guiding human-sent hunters across forbidden wards. My heartbeat hammered. I could feel the lie everyone had rehearsed getting ready to defend itself. Kael continued. The accusation was not merely false, it was engineered. A council member scoffed. How can you be certain? She wears the enemy's bridle mark. Kael's eyes burned. Because her magic has never answered to the enemy. He turned toward me, not asking, choosing. Show them, Kael commanded. My stomach tightened. Performing felt like another trap, another way to become a symbol instead of a person. But exile had taught me I could be more than what people pinned on me. I stepped forward. I lifted my collarbone toward the hall's light. My crescent birthmark flared, and magic surged outward like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The runes in the floor responded, not with violence, with memory. Images flashed in the air for only a heartbeat, night corridors, a courtyard exploding, Vesper's shadow watching from below, the way my magic had fought to protect the wardstones instead of opening them. The council gasped. The guilty faces went blank. One wolf stumbled backward as if he'd been struck. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Truth didn't need my sadness. It needed my clarity. When the visions faded, I turned to the scoffing council member. You think a mark is consent, I said, voice low. You don't understand what it costs to survive coercion. Kael's jaw tightened as if he wanted to say something else, something more human, but he swallowed it. Walls again. Slow. Then Kael finally sat upon his throne. The motion felt like the world accepting a new gravity. Her name is cleared, he declared, and anyone who helped frame her will answer to me. The hall erupted with murmurs. Some voices rose in outrage, some broke into fear. I expected them to attack. I expected them to try to undo his decision. Instead, someone stepped forward from the side of the council, tall, elegant, too calm. Vesper Halewyn. My lungs forgot how to work. I'd hated him from the moment I'd seen his satisfaction across the courtyard. Now he stood among Kael's people like he belonged there. His smile was thin and beautiful, eyes icy and patient. Kael Draven, Vesper said, still collecting broken things? Kael's posture didn't change, but the air tightened around him. You came to gloat? Kael asked. Vesper's gaze slid to me, and my body reacted before my mind could. Magic flared under my skin like it recognized his hand around my throat. I came, Vesper said softly, to reclaim what was taken, and to remind you, Seraphine, that you never belonged to the wolves who pretended to protect you. My fists curled. I wanted to rush him. I wanted to rip his grin off his face. But Kael's protection still held, still anchored. I glanced at him, searching his face for permission. He gave it without words. Kael stood and stepped down from the throne. He didn't approach Vesper like a duelist. He approached like a judge. Say what you came to say, Kael ordered. Vesper laughed quietly. Your kingdom is built on fear. You think you can decide who's guilty? You think you can keep her? He pointed at my chest. At your best, Kael, you can only delay what she is. My throat burned. Kael's eyes sharpened. what she is. Vesper's smile widened, and I felt the hook under my ribs respond to his words like it was hungry for agreement. She is a key, Vesper said, a conduit that can open the old human wards.
The ones that were supposed to be sealed after the last breach.
My blood chilled. Humans were forbidden here because the old breaches weren't legends. They were scars, wounds in the world, and someone had always wanted to reopen them. I swallowed hard. You framed me to open those wards? Vesper's gaze didn't waver. To open them, yes. To control what comes through, yes. And you would have helped if you hadn't fought your fate. Kael's voice went low. You're lying. Vesper's eyes glittered. Am I? Then why does her mark wake when I speak? Why does it respond to your touch as if you and I share the same bloodline curse? My stomach turned. Share the same curse. Bloodline. My mind raced through memories, birth, training, the way certain runes had always felt familiar, the way my father had avoided questions with a sorrowful smile. My magic surged again, anger sparking like lightning. Kael stepped closer to me, not to touch, but to stand beside me like a wall with a heartbeat.
I will hear this from her,
Kael said. Vesper tilted his head. You'll hear what she thinks is truth, but you'll never hear what the magic reveals. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small artifact wrapped in dark cloth. When he unwrapped it, the scent of old smoke filled the hall. A shard of obsidian runestone, the same style of ward I'd seen on the blackened stones outside the clearing. Vesper held it up. Her mark is incomplete, he said. It was never meant to be whole until she stood in the presence of her intended alpha. The hall went still. My mind seized on the phrase, intended alpha. Intended. Meant. Planned. I felt my power ripple, wanting to answer. Not to him. To something deeper. Kael's gaze turned razor sharp. You mean mate, he said. Vesper smiled. I mean destiny. Kael's expression shifted, just slightly. Something raw and wounded slipping through the mask. It was the first crack, and I saw it. Not a romantic softness, a fear. Like the idea of destiny had once been used as a leash. I stepped away from Vesper's gaze and looked at Kael directly. Is that why you saved me? I asked. Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, quiet and fierce, I saved you because they cast you out before I could reach you. My heart slammed. Before I could reach you. Like he'd been searching. Like he'd felt me missing. I didn't have time to untangle the emotion because Vesper's magic swelled. The obsidian shard hummed. A ward circle tried to bloom around me. I felt the air thicken, felt my magic being pulled forward like a puppet yanked by strings. Kael moved instantly. He pressed his palm to the air in front of the ward circle, not touching me, and the circle shattered with a sound like glass breaking. Vesper snarled, an ugly edge for the first time. Your walls are not stronger than fate, Vesper hissed. Kael's eyes burned. Maybe, but my will is. He turned toward me. Seraphine, he said, voice steady but urgent. Come with me now. The longer you remain here, the more he can control the conduit. I should have obeyed. I did hesitate, one heartbeat too long. Then my agency flared. I looked at Vesper and spoke like I was carving my own destiny into stone. You don't get to decide what I open, I said. Vesper's smile returned. Then show me. I felt the hook under my ribs surge. I stepped forward, not backward. I raised my hands. My birthmark blazed. And the ward circle that Vesper had tried to build inside Kael's hall collapsed inward on itself, swallowed by my light. My magic wasn't just a key, it was a choice. Kael's breath caught. So did mine. The hall held its breath. Then, as if the world had reached the end of patience, Vesper screamed. Not from pain alone, from loss. I felt the obsidian shard crack in his hand. He staggered back. Kael stepped forward, but he didn't strike. He simply raised his hand and commanded the hall's protections to bind Vesper with old wards. Vesper's body jerked once, then he was sealed away behind rune bars. My hands shook. A tremor ran through my bones as my magic settled. Kael approached me now, closer than before. He reached out. This time, he didn't hesitate. His fingers brushed the crescent birthmark lightly, testing, not claiming. My magic flared, and I realized with sick clarity that it wanted him. It wanted his power because it recognized his lineage. Kael's eyes darkened. "You felt it, didn't you?" he murmured. I swallowed. "I hated it." He nodded once. "Good." His voice turned rough. "Hate keeps you awake. It keeps you choosing." I stared up at him. The king who'd saved me wasn't gentle. He wasn't suddenly in love. He was just refusing to let anyone decide my life for me. That refusal made something in my chest unclench. Only a little. Walls still existed, but cracks let air in. Kael led me out of the throne hall into a moonlit courtyard, away from the watchers. He didn't ask permission to bring me there. He brought me like he was claiming my safety, not my obedience. The night air cooled my heated skin. I pressed my palms to my own arms, grounding myself. "What is my real role?" I asked. Kael's gaze lifted to the sky like he was reading the constellations for a warning only he understood. Then he looked at me. "Your father hid the truth from you," he said. My stomach dropped. "My father?" Kael nodded slightly. "He wasn't only a border guardian. He was connected to an older vow, one that ties your bloodline to mine." My throat tightened. "Connected how?" Kael's voice went quiet, almost pained. "I was meant to choose you without coercion. He was meant to ensure the treaty used the right blood, but Vesper altered it. He turned your destiny into a weapon." I stared at him, trying to decide if I wanted to believe him. Trust didn't come quickly after exile. Trust had to be earned. But there was something in Kael's eyes, something that wasn't performance. He looked like he'd been carrying the missing piece for too long. "Then why didn't you come sooner?" I demanded, anger snapping back to life. "If you knew, if you felt, why did my pack banish me?" Kael's jaw flexed. For a moment, the intimidating king looked younger, rawer. "Because I did feel," he said. "But I thought it was a prophecy. I thought it was a lure. I was building a wall to protect my kingdom from the kind of fate that devours people." He exhaled slowly. "And by the time I realized you were the victim, you were already gone." My eyes stung. I hated that my heart responded even when my mind didn't want to. I had been broken by betrayal. And yet here was the man who could break the world's lies with his hands. I didn't want to be a prophecy. I wanted to be a woman, a choice. "Don't call me destiny," I whispered. Kael's gaze softened, just enough to be dangerous. "I won't," he promised. "Not if you don't want it." Then, slowly, he stepped closer. He raised his hands and hovered near my shoulders, waiting for me to decide. The fact that he waited, truly waited, hit deeper than any rescue. I could have stepped away. I didn't. I leaned into his presence, cautious but honest. His hands settled on my shoulders, firm and warm. My birthmark flared faintly, responding to the contact. Kael closed his eyes for one breath, as if the sensation hurt and healed at the same time. When he opened them, his voice was low. "You're stronger than you've been allowed to show." I let out a harsh laugh. "I'm stronger because I was thrown away." Kael's lips twitched. "Then let the strength be yours, not theirs." I swallowed hard. My anger didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became purpose. Kael guided me back inside the fortress, not to a chamber meant for a bride, not to a cell meant for a prisoner. He guided me to a training hall where the runes carved into the stone were living, responsive, watching. He brought a blade and a set of talismans, not for me to perform, for me to learn. "Your magic is not only a key," he said. "It's a shield. Vesper wants you to open old wards, but I can teach you how to close them, how to decide what your power does." I stared at him, distrust buzzing in my blood. "How?" I asked. Kael met my gaze. "By letting you practice, by keeping you safe while you fail and learn." My chest tightened. Safe. The word sounded foreign in my mouth. I lifted the talisman from the table. It was cool, heavy, marked with tiny crescents like my birthmark. The first time I tried to activate it, nothing happened. I felt frustration rise. I tried again, harder, pushing my magic until it burned. The hall flickered with warning runes. Kael stepped beside me instantly. "Stop," he said. I snapped my head toward him. "It's not working." His voice stayed calm but edged with command. "Because you're forcing it." I hated that he was right. I drew in a breath and forced my magic to slow. Instead of pushing power outward, I pulled it inward, feeling the hook under my ribs turn into a thread I could hold. When I activated the talisman again, it glowed softly. The rune lights in the hall responded like they'd been waiting for my permission. Kael's eyes narrowed with approval. I exhaled shakily, shock rolling through me. "I did it," I said. Kael's gaze dropped to my mouth, then lifted to my eyes again. "You did it," he echoed. That simple repetition made my heart tremble. The king's walls weren't coming down because he wanted me. They were coming down because he trusted me to become something worth loving. Over the following nights, I stayed close enough to feel him, not because he demanded it, because I needed to understand the way his power aligned with mine. Kael's training became a language between us. When I lost control, he steadied my breathing, his hand at my back, his voice in my ear, always instructing rather than taking. When I felt rage surge, he didn't scold me. He taught me to aim it. When I flinched at touch, he stopped instantly and asked, quietly, sincerely, what I needed. Sometimes he waited minutes for my answer. Sometimes he waited until the night ended. My pride fought him. My trauma fought him. But slowly, the fear inside me learned to recognize safety, and Kael learned to recognize that I wasn't a rescued object. I was a survivor with teeth. The shocking twist wasn't Vesper's existence, it was the fact that he wasn't alone. Kael had suspected this from the beginning, but only after my magic stabilized did the truth begin to show itself. On the 12th night, when we stood over an ancient archive sealed beneath the fortress, I saw runes in the stone that matched the ones embedded into my birthmark. Not just similar, exact. Like a lock and key set designed by the same hand, Kael opened the archive with a vow stone in his palm. The seal broke. Dust rose. Inside lay a map of old wards and a portrait etched into silver metal. A woman, young, with my crescent birthmark, with Kael's rune scar across her brow. My breath caught. I stared at it, unable to move. "That's impossible," I whispered. Kael's voice turned hoarse. "Nothing is impossible in old magic, only hidden." He lifted the portrait carefully. "This was the vow set before the treaty was corrupted, the first time your bloodline and mine were bound." My skin prickled. Then Kael turned the portrait toward me. On the back, a sentence in an ancient script glowed faintly when my magic touched it. I read it slowly, fear turning to fury with each word. It wasn't prophecy. It was a confession. The treaty hadn't chosen me to be an enemy's bride. It had chosen me to be the rescuer of Kael's past self, from a fate that would have devoured him. I stared at Kael. He looked like he was bracing for impact. "Vesper," I said, voice low, "didn't just frame me." Kael nodded once. He tried to break the cycle before it could correct itself. The archive shook faintly, as if the stone didn't like being exposed. I swallowed hard. My betrayal wasn't only personal, It was part of a bigger war between hidden forces. Vesper wanted the old human wards opened, but more than that, he wanted to turn our vow into a weapon that could control kings and keys alike. That knowledge sharpened me. I wasn't just healing. I was learning to fight a system. And when Kael turned toward me, his gaze searching my face like he needed to know I was still real, I felt the truth settle in my bones. He wasn't going to let me be used. Not ever. "Then tell me what you need from me," I said. Kael's eyes darkened. "Everything," he said, "and you get to decide what you give." The forced proximity between us stopped feeling like captivity. It started feeling like partnership. On the night Vesper broke his rune bars, the sky turned bruise purple, and the fortress wards flared like living eyes. I felt it first, the tremor under my skin. My birthmark burned. "Kael," I said, stepping toward the corridor. He was already moving, armor on, rune lights flaring along his arms. We ran together through halls carved like ribs around the heart of the fortress. Guards shouted, torches sputtered, wards cracked. Then the air split in the courtyard. Vesper emerged from the shattered bars like smoke shaped into a man, his smile triumphant and sick. "You healed her," Vesper taunted, voice carrying across the courtyard. "But healing doesn't erase what she is." Kael's stance tightened. His eyes flicked to me. He didn't reach for me. He waited. He made it clear with his stillness that I could choose. My power surged. I felt the old ward threads in the air, lines of fate Vesper tried to pull like strings. I stepped forward anyway. Not toward Vesper's magic. Toward the center of the courtyard where the ancient runes lay. I placed my palm against the stone. My birthmark flared so bright it lit the courtyard like a second moon. Vesper screamed as my magic answered the vow in the archive, the cycle correcting itself. Kael watched, focused, intense, but there was something else in his eyes now. Admiration. Not for my power alone, for my choice. When Vesper lunged toward me, Kael moved between us like a shield carved out of thunder. Our power surged simultaneously. His aura wrapped around my magic, not overpowering it, supporting it. For the first time, I felt us align, not as fate, as decision. The courtyard runes flared, and the old human ward network unfolded like vines burning into truth. Vesper's spell tried to open a gate. I felt the hinge of the world. I felt the temptation, power that promised control. And I realized the final trick Vesper had been banking on. If I opened the wards, I might be able to fix my past. I might be able to bring something back. Maybe my father. Maybe the pack that threw me away. Maybe the version of me that had been forced into a lie. That was how Vesper would have turned my grief into a weapon. But Kael's walls, slow, careful, patient, had taught me something. Healing wasn't about undoing the past. It was about choosing what you did with what was left. So I closed the hinge. Not gently, not without rage. I sealed it with my own light. The gate snapped shut with a roar that shook the courtyard stones. Vesper staggered back, his face twisting in disbelief. "No," he rasped. "You were supposed to open it." I stepped forward, breathing hard. My voice came out calm despite the shaking in my hands. "I was supposed to be used. That doesn't mean I will comply." Kael's hand finally touched my shoulder, grounding me. I looked up at him. His storm-gray eyes were darker than the night. His mouth parted as if he wanted to speak, and couldn't find the right words. Instead, he lifted his hand to my face carefully, thumb brushing a tear that had finally escaped. He didn't wipe away more than necessary. He didn't pretend my pain hadn't happened. He simply acknowledged it. "I should have come sooner," he said. The admission felt like a confession, and I realized his walls were falling not because he was weak, but because he was brave enough to be honest. I shook my head. "I'm not asking for apologies. I'm asking for a choice." Kael stared at me, then he nodded slowly. "I choose you," he said, voice steady as a vow. Not because you're a key, not because destiny says it. I choose you because you survived betrayal and became someone who refuses to be owned. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. I wanted to believe him, I did, but belief wasn't enough. The final trial was always going to be the one that tested whether I could stop expecting abandonment. Vesper's defeat didn't end the danger. It only removed one enemy. Old magic remained restless, and the world would try to test us again. Kael made his declaration to his council and his packs. He didn't just protect me, he claimed me with law. But he did it in a way that preserved my agency. He offered me a seat beside him, not as a trophy, as a partner. On the day he set the vow stones into place, he asked me to speak my own terms. "Say what you want," Kael told me, hands close but not touching. I stood before the runes that pulsed like a living heart. My magic was calmer now, fed by training and purpose. My grief still lived in my bones, but it no longer consumed me. I looked at Kael. His walls were down in places now. Not all of them, slowly, but enough. "I want the truth to be public," I said. Kael nodded. "Done." "I want Vesper's conspirators named, not spared," I continued. Kael's eyes hardened. "Done." "And I want no one to call me an enemy's bride again," I whispered. Kael's voice turned low. "Then don't let them." "I will make your name law." I swallowed. "And when the next breach tries to open," I said, lifting my chin, "I want to be the one who closes it, not you, not the council. Me." Kael stared at me like I was asking him to burn his own throne. Then he smiled, small, honest. "Then we'll build a kingdom where you don't have to beg for control," he said. My chest loosened. The vow stones flared when my birthmark touched the ancient circle. Something deep inside me clicked into place. Not a trap, a completion. My magic, my true nature unfurled gently, like wings finally allowed to open. Kael exhaled, and the sound was almost relief. He stepped close. This time, his hand did touch me. He pressed his palm against my cheek, thumb smoothing the line of a scar I'd earned from exile. "I'm not going to make you submit," Kael promised. My laugh came out broken. "Good." Then he leaned in, not reckless, not demanding, but reverent. And when his lips brushed my forehead, it felt like a seal breaking. My body shook with emotion I'd spent months refusing. I had been broken. But I wasn't shattered anymore. I was chosen. And choosing back, choosing him, didn't erase what happened. It transformed it. As the fortress lights flickered and the runes settled, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. Kael Draven didn't just protect me, he made room for the woman I had to become. His walls had come down slowly because he understood the cost of rushing healing. When he pulled back, his eyes were still intense, still kingly, but the hardness had softened into devotion. I rested my hand over his rune-scarred brow. "Your destiny isn't fate," I said. Kael's gaze locked on mine. "It's choice," I finished. His mouth curved slightly. "Then let's keep choosing," he said. And I did. I chose him in the way I had chosen my magic, with agency, with fury tempered into purpose, with trust built brick by brick. Outside, the forbidden human wards remained sealed. Inside, my heart finally belonged to someone who would never treat it like a weapon. Kael Draven was the Alpha King who had found me after exile. But love, real love, had never been his rescue. It was our transformation together.